Shalom, Yahba Shimi Al Shai Brakathum to all my brothers, Yahweh Shemal Athaba Shimi Al Shai to all my sisters. We're the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge. Started out of 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York. We've been teaching so-called Negroes, so-called Hispanics, and so-called Native Indians that they're the Lord's chosen people according to the Bible. We've been teaching this truth under Command and General Yohana since 1969. Today's our history class. Monday nights from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. is our history class. Let me know if I'm having any audio issues. Let me know if I'm having any connection issues. Class is going to be recorded, so I'll upload it after. But let me know if I'm having any issues with the connection. But we're going to talk about good old Labor Day, right? A lot of brothers and sisters probably prepared their barbecue specials, the abominable pork ribs, the abominable shrimp, crab, lobsters. They probably got it all prepared, slapping hot dogs and hamburgers in their face. And a lot of times when we celebrate these holidays, we do it in vain. And we have to get to options, you know? What's the purpose of this holiday? What is it about? Who is it for? You know what I mean? These are questions that we should administer in our mind, especially when we're under the falsehood of this American lifestyle, especially when we're under our oppressors who has trained us to be excellent slaves in this kingdom. And we partake in all their historical events. We partake in all their holidays. We partake in every aspect of the society. We've joined their military. We've joined their police unions. But more specifically, just to get to the point, today we're going to talk about racial disparity. It seems like my connection issue is off today. Let me see if I can get a better connection. But before we do that, we're going to talk about racial disparity in the workers' union. And then we're going to talk about who Labor Day is for. Right, and the history of Labor Day, we're going to read up on it in about a hot sec. I'm not sure, Rock, if you're online, let me know about this internet connection. It's been a little fugazi these last couple weeks. But let me know. It seems like I'm connected. But we're going to give it a quick sec for any questions anyone might have. By all means, ask your questions. Make sure that my okay, internet seems to wob right now on my end. But I'll give it another sec for any questions. Let me pull up some articles. Let's really break down the history of Labor Day and who it really is for. You know what I mean? And not to be long-winded, but you got to understand that America was built off the back of black people, right? During the time of slavery, we've acquired so many skills as craftsmen, as construction workers, as engineers. We've acquired so many skills when it even down to masonry, carpentry. And so when we came out of slavery, we were able to pick up fast and build and create our own infrastructures, our own societies at a rapid rate, where you have places like Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Rosewood and other black societies where, you know, the foundation of it was a breeze to put together. We had doctors, we had lawyers, we had schools, We had, we had everything that is required to run a town. And we had the skills that surpassed our suppressors, which is what we'll get into, that created the Jim Crow in the South and the Jim Crow in the North. Now I say the Jim Crow in the North because during the 20th century, you want to talk about the Great Migration and the second Great Migration of Southerner Negroes that migrated to the North, to places like Detroit, New York, Chicago, to look for work because of the Jim Crow laws and the black codes that were going on into the South, and how we were being choked out over there. We left by the drove and moved up north, thinking it would be better. And another reason why many black people were recruited into these mills, the railway companies, and whatnot, is because of the strikes that were going on, the worker strikes that were going on, where the employer decided to recruit black people at a lower wage, and but with better skills, with better skill sets. And this angered our oppressor, who then decided to start unions that promoted racial disparity. But we'll get into that more. Let me see if you have any questions. Hopefully my internet connection is good. Seems a little flaky right now, but Lord willing, we can continue this class without any issues. I'll give it another sec, and then we're gonna get started on this. All right. All right, let's get it going. There's no questions online. Let's get it going. Let me pull up my first joint I want to pull up today. Salakia, let me get it. We've been bamboozled way too many times in regards to this idea of equal rights. You could never attain this idea of equal rights living under your oppressor. What you have to realize is that your oppressor hates you, right? The people that should be celebrated and that should be honored during Labor Day are the slaves. And when I say the slaves, the true slaves in this kingdom, which is our Mexican brothers, which is our black and Hispanic brothers, right? These are the people that should be honored during Labor Day, who, when it came time, our Mexican brothers took extremely low wages, right, to work in our oppressor's field, right? Was willing, traveled from his country, which America has destroyed, to travel from Mexico and to travel from Central America that has been suppressed by our enemies, to come out here to have a better life, to be able to provide for his family, to be able to live. And he comes here and he's willing to take 1/10 of the wages that the average American would be given, and to work your fields, and to do your landscaping, and to foster your kids, right? Our oppressors' kids, for extremely low wages. You know what I mean? Our oppressor knows that we as a collective have better skill sets and are more profitable in the workforce labor, right? You know what I mean? You can have, a group of Mexican brothers that could outcompete our oppressor when it comes to construction, which is why the construction unions have always displayed racist tactics when it came to hiring our people, when it came to hiring blacks and Hispanics. And you know what I mean? Because we can outcompete them. That's how much of a advantage we have when it comes to trade, when it comes to the workforce. You know what I mean? And so our oppressor knows this and has created these unions to make sure that we are not in there profiting and making more money than them. In retrospect to our skill sets and the skill sets that we've acquired. You know what I mean? A brother, Salakia, our oppressor can go and grab 5 Mexicans and build a house in damn near 2 days. And he's doing that to go grab those brothers because he knows he can give them the absurd low amount of wages that he's able to gain in his investment. You know what I mean? But yeah, let's get this out real quick. Give me 1 second. Let me just let me pull this up real quick. All right. Let's see. Find it. Okay, so I got one quick article I wanted to pull up. Okay, we're gonna go to this is
Something's not right. Wait a few minutes and try setting up again. You can also try unplugging your device and plugging it back in.
This right here is the on the NewYorker.com, right? The name of this article is called "A Labor Day Reflection on Unions, Race, and Division." Right? I want you to I'm just on the thing so you know what I'm bringing up right now. Salaki, let me pull this up. All right. I was reading this earlier. It was very interesting. But let's get it going, right? So it's going to give a brief history about Labor Day, and it's going to really break down some of the race relations when it comes to the workforce, break down the unions and the division in the workforce. You know what I mean? You got to understand that Labor Day was started to give white workers more jobs. You know what I mean? That's why it was really started. But the people the ones that get the praise for Labor Day are the labor unions, the workers' unions. Where you have gangsters like Jimmy Hoffa and all these other Italian and Irish gangsters that have profited huge on black labor, right? That started these unions not for the purpose of giving our people jobs, but for lucre's sake, for the purpose of making an extreme amount of money and getting credit for this particular holiday more specifically, right? And, think about why there were so many laws that pertained to the workforce. You know what I mean? There was a time in America where children would be out there working in these factories. There was a time in America where specifically they would go for children and women because they knew that they could pay them low wages. And the work conditions were horrendous in America, right? And so what would they do? They would look for immigrants. They would look for black people. They would look for Mexicans, right? to go and fill up these factories in the most horrible conditions, right? And so, as time went on, laws and started to come into place. You know what I mean? To protect what they would call the worker, right? Or in our understanding, the slave. But let's read on this real quick. Let me see if any questions. Let me know. But I put up the article here. Let me see if I could blast it real quick. All right, let me just see if I could do that real quick. Let me pull this up real quick, all right? Give me 1 second. Let's get it. Bear with me, y'all. Bear with me. I'm going to try to get this up. All right. Not sure if y'all can see that. Let's see if we can get. All right, let's pull this up real quick, all right? Let's read the first paragraph. It says, on the morning of September 5th, 1882, spectators lined Lower Broadway in Manhattan near City Hall, waiting for the start of America's first Labor Day parade. Finally, Matthew McGuire, a machinist from New Jersey, who is widely believed to have come up with the idea of Labor Day, announced that a jeweler's local farm, Newark, had arrived with its marching band, and the parade set off. As the band turned up to Broadway, playing a piece from Gilbert and Sullivan opera, a small crowd of workers and spectators fell in line behind it. By the time they reached Reservoir Park, where the main branch of New York Public Library now stands, the procession has expanded to more than 10,000 people. Let's keep reading. The police had lined Broadway too in case violence broke out, as it had on July 13th, 1863. Now I want you to read this carefully. Let me go back real quick, all right? Let me go back. Salaki. So I want you to read this carefully, right? This is going to talk about the Irish, right? Who there's been much debate and much debacle about the Irish being indentured servants, and how the Irish will use that to say, well, we went through the same thing as black people went through. If you've ever visited Boston, Massachusetts, you notice how I said Boston. You can tell that accent is there. Terrible accent at that. But if you visited Boston, Massachusetts, what you'll understand is that the Irish run things out here, right? They've benefited in America. And they've benefited because they're able to not go through any racial disparity any of the racial disparity that black people have gone through. They're able to identify with their own, right? Considering that their own might have had ill will towards them when they first migrated, which is something that happens in any society. But they've been able to excel in America. They've been able to run corporations, and they've been able to run cities, right? And they've been able to financially they've been able to acquire the financial stability from the inset of Irish that first came into this country. They own businesses. So now the idea that they were indentured servants is the idea of them having to pay back a debt, right? Our servitude was not to pay back a debt. Our servitude was a lifetime thing. It wasn't something that we had, some sort of misfortune and fell into debt and had to work off that debt. What the Irish had to do was work off a debt, which is what you can describe as someone that is indentured, right? What you can describe what an indentured servant is. It's someone that's paying off a debt, right? So to correlate the Irish and black people in America is far and wide, right? It's two different extremes. One of them is paying off a debt. The other one can never pay off that debt, and will always and has stayed the day that slave died. You know what I mean? But let's read up on this real quick. I'm gonna pull this up. Let's read about the Irish real quick. All right. And let's see how, and let's see, let's pull them out real quick. Let's call them out real quick on this article. It says right here, I'm going to put my mouse on it. The police had lined Broadway 2 in case violence broke out, as it had on July 13, 1863. I wondered what happened on July 13, 1863. Let's find out. When a mob, mostly made of Irish workers, ransacked a building in Midtown that was the site of the draft lottery. So now, during this time of the Civil War, they were trying to draft the Irish into the war. And let's find out their reaction. They ended up ransacking a building in Midtown that was the site of a draft lottery, right? The attack at the midpoint of the Civil War launched 5 days of chaos known as the New York City draft riots, right? Now let's find out why they ransacked this draft lottery building in Midtown. Let's find out why the New York City draft riots started, all right? Let's get it. Over here, let's read. The workers were angry that a new law required every man between the ages of 20 and 35 to be subject to the draft, and that the wealthier citizens could buy their way out of it. But the riots were also now, so the first reason why they were angry is because they didn't want to fight for America, right? You see a lot of Irish today, a lot of them swear that they're patriotic, but when it came time to fight for the Union during the Civil War, they rioted. You know what I mean? They wanted no part of that Civil War. They didn't want they didn't show any act of patriotism, right? When black people that were fighting for the North and South were probably the most patriotic of everyone that fought in that war, because they were slaves that were fighting for their freedom at the same notion, right? And these Irish workers, they weren't slaves in 1863, which is what I'm trying to mention, right? They might have been indentured servants. They might have been working off a debt, but they were not slaves in 1863. They were not fighting for their freedom, right? To acquire freedom. Let's keep going. But it says here, let me go back here. Let's go back to this real quick. But it says here, and that wealthier citizens could buy their way out. So now this is the reason why they were angry, because they're like, damn, We don't have enough money to buy our way out of this war, right? But the wealthy did have the money to buy their way out. But the riot, now here's the kicker, but the riots were also a response to the recently issued Emancipation Proclamation. Pay attention. The Irish rioted also in response to the recently issued Emancipation Proclamation and the fear stoked by pro-Confederacy Democratic politicians and newspapers that free black citizens who were exempt from the Union draft would soon be taking the jobs of white workers. Now, let's get back to the Irish. Now, you just saw what I just read. The New York draft riots, which was something that was initiated by Irish workers. The response of the Emancipation of Proclamation, right? And the idea that black people, free black people that were exempt from the Union draft would soon be taking the jobs of white workers. You hear now? Let's fast forward from 1863 to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Why was Tulsa, Oklahoma burnt down to the ground and so many had to die? Because our oppressor has always hated us, right? Even if you don't believe that the prophecies in Deuteronomy 28, right? Where it says that we would be sold to our enemies. Even if you don't believe that we are the ones that are going to be sold to enemies, at least understand one thing, that our enemies who sold us hate us, right? Black people have been trying to be friends with their enemies, the people that sold them. How dumb does that sound for you to try to be friends with the people that sold you? You know what I mean? That's one of the most idiotic things that you can do. Is try to be, think about it. You're trying to be, someone sold me, right? I'm under his captivity. I'm continually being oppressed by this beast. And now our black leaders want us to be friends with the people that sold us. How does that work? How does that pan out? Right? Our oppressor has hated us since the womb. Right? Let me pull up Genesis. Let's go to the book of Genesis, right? Y'all, I know every single one of y'all out there got a Bible. Don't front like y'all ain't got a Bible. You're probably rolling blunts on it right now. You're probably balancing your chair with the Bible right now. That rocky chair that where that one leg is just making your chair lean over. Well, let's pull up the Bible. Our records. When I say our, I'm talking about the so-called Negro, the so-called Hispanic, and the so-called Native Indian. Let's go to Genesis, right? Let's jump to Genesis chapter 25. Let's jump to Genesis chapter 25. Come on, brothers. Let's jump to Genesis chapter 25, right? And let's read what it says. It says here in Genesis 25. It says in verse 21, and Isaac entreated of the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord was entreated of him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now, so Isaac and Rebekah were having twins, right? But this sister was struggling. I mean, these babies were going at it in the womb, right? And let's read what it says. And it says, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, if it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. Right? The Lord, our power, is able to have a sister, allow a sister to have twins, right? And make those twins separated through nationality, right? And this is what it's describing here. These 2 twins, the Lord made them 2 nations, meaning 2 separate people, 2 different nationalities, right? And it says it right here. And he also said, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. Let me tell you something about us and our oppressor, is that we are 2 manner of people. The one thing that he knew during the time before they started to create this Jim Crow in the North with the unions, the one thing that he knew is that he knew that we had surpassed them when it came to our skill sets and our craftsmanship and our carpentry and our level of work ethics superseded our oppressor. And he knew that. And we were the ones that were being hired by these companies, by these mills, because we were more skillful than our oppressor. And so because of that, he created these unions to create a racial disparity in the workforce. And what we have to understand is that we've always struggled with the so-called white man since Genesis 25, when Rebecca had to entreat of the Lord of why the 2 her 2 sons in the womb were causing her pain and fighting. When children are struggling inside of a woman's womb, that is painful. A woman is going through it when she goes through pregnancy. When that child is kicking, that inflicts pain on a woman. So we have to understand that we've always been at odds with our oppressor. Our oppressor hates us. And he's hated us since the book of Genesis, right? He's always plotted our demise since the garden. Since that snake that was sitting there trying to make Adam fall in the garden. And we have become suckers to think that we can have equal work rights. We have become suckers to think that we can ever attain equality in this place under the people that sold us. When in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 28, it says we have been sold onto our enemies. And this is why I want to bring it up. Now let's go back to the New York race riots, right? Let's pull this up real quick. New York draft riots, right? So we now know that the Irish, the reason why they started these draft riots in New York is because of the Emancipation Proclamation and the idea that free black citizens would be taking the jobs of white workers, right? Which is the reason why they burnt down Tulsa, Oklahoma, because we were building a utopia in front of them. And we were showing them that we could be well off on our own, that we could circulate the money within our own infrastructure, within our own towns. You know what I mean? How is it that, the Arabs were able to build so many crown chickens, right? In our neighborhoods. Like, how is that possible, right? How is it that we, being a special people, a holy people, right? And a more, and the most talented people on the planet, how is it that we're not able to show for it through businesses, right? How is it that, if we were to create unions, a black union, we would have to, the idea of creating a black union to go work under your oppressor sounds like the dumbest thing I ever heard. Like, if we're going to create a black union, right, we would have to do it in a way where we have our own factories, where we have our own clothing lines, where we have our own business, commerce, infrastructures. You know what I mean? That's the only way that would work, right? And so the racial disparity within the workers' union in America was designed to give white workers more jobs. And the reason why I'm bringing it up about the Irish, the so-called indentured servants, is that those indentured servants later became CEOs, later became union, later started unions along with the Italians and profited huge off these unions, right? But let's find out how the Irish reacted during this time. And the reason I'm bringing up Irish is because, number one, I live in Boston. I mean, you just look at the Boston Celtics. They got Irish colors, right? The Irish have been well off in this place. They might have came in the beginning under in the midst of their cousins and were treated poorly, but they, as you can see now, the Irish have benefited. They have prospered in this kingdom. And what do we have to show for it? We've been here longer than the Irish. We weren't indentured servants. We were lifetime slaves. We didn't have a debt to pay off, right? So now, the fact that we could have acquired some jobs after the Emancipation Proclamation, what ended up happening? The Jim Crow of the South, right? Race riots, right? What ended up happening? Sharecropping, right? Here's another one. Let me figure out what the name is. The other one that was huge was convict leasing. That was another one that was huge, right? But let's keep reading. We're at 8 o'clock now. Let's get to the meat of this, right? So now let's figure out how the Irish reacted after the Emancipation Proclamation, and how Southerners stoked the idea that free blacks would take our jobs, and a lot of this was a propaganda from pro-Confederacy Democratic politicians, right here, right? And the newspapers that were putting this propaganda out that we would be taking all these white jobs. Let's see how our oppressor reacted when this came about. Let's read. It says here, right? I'm gonna highlight it for you. It says, white mobs lynched 11 black men and burned an orphanage for black children. This is how they reacted when they realized, when through the propaganda of the newspaper, Southern newspapers, and pro-Confederacy Democratic politicians pumped into the minds of Americans that we would be taking their jobs. What did they do? They killed 11 black men and they burned a black orphanage, right? That's how cruel and so and a monster that our oppressor is, to burn a black orphanage, children, right, that don't have a family, that are in an orphanage, and you go and you burn it. The Lord, I pray that the Lord burns your offsprings in their orphanages. I pray that that happens, right? And I'm calling out the so-called Irishman who has considered himself to fall under the same conditions that we have, right? Let's keep reading. It says this. The 233 children who lived there escaped. Several thousand troops finally subdued the rioters, by which time more than 100 people had been killed. So the Irish were going around just killing black people because they were angry that they had to be drafted into the Civil War. You know what I mean? Which shows you how unpatriotic the Irish have always been, right? And the fact that they would go and kill and burn down a black orphanage shows you how much our oppressor hates us. All right? Let's keep reading. Let's get it. It says this. I'm going to highlight it for you. It says, the following March, the New York Workmen's Democratic Republican Association offered President Abraham Lincoln an honorary membership. Lincoln accepted and praising labor roles in American society. And here's the thing, right? It says this: capital is the only fruit of labor, he said. Let me tell you something. The white man is willing to give up. The reason why a lot of those strikes came about is because when the white man decided to strike, his fellow counterpart, his employer, who were white, decided that they were going to recruit more skillful black people to go up into their companies and work at lower wages but better skill sets. Our oppressor, he thinks about money. That's his God. His God is money. Before, you could, he's willing to put his morality and his principalities and his principles to the side if it makes money. That's why they have this saying, right, where it says, if it don't make money, it don't make sense. Now think about it, right? You're an employer and you have a big factory and mills and all kinds of things, right? And these factories that you have to pay the federal wages that's required to your employer and to your employees who are white employees. And then because of the harsh conditions of when you think about the what Labor Day supposedly represents, it represents the enactment of laws, right, that made the workplace a better environment, right? Isn't that what they say? But people go on strike because of horrible workplace environments. People go on strike because of low wages, and they want more wages for the work that they're doing. They're doing 12 hours a day. So when the white man went on strike, that white boy said, you know what? Let me hire black people at lower wages, which would be more profitable, and they have more of a skill set. And because this was going on, and also what it was doing was it was inflicting more harm on our people. When we would go to those work sites, we would get lynched, we would be killed, we would be threatened, you know what I mean? And we would risk our lives for the sake of this company wanted to make more profit. But let's keep reading. Here's what Lincoln said, right? He said, capital is the only fruit of labor. Let me tell you something. It's all about money, right? This is what it's all about. But he also offered the delegation advice. The country's working people, Lincoln said, should be aware of prejudice, working division, and hostility amongst themselves. The most notable feature of disturbance in your city last summer was the hanging of some working people by other working people. It should never be so. The strongest bond of human sympathy outside of the family relation should be one uniting all working people of all nations and tongues and kindreds. Now, Lincoln, that sounds good, right? It makes it seem like you're an honorable man, right? But we all know the intentions of the Union, right? We all knew what that was about, right? Lincoln was never for the black man. He was never for freeing black people. But he was definitely for uniting the North and the South. That's what his whole MO was about. And if the workplace environment ceased, I mean, think about it, right? When it came to the railways, right? The strikes that were going on with the railways and the strikes that were going on with the federal organizations in America. What you have to understand is that if the mailman stops delivering mail and people cease from working, the society will crumble. So the government has to figure out a way to make amends between the two working classes, right? There's two working classes. There's the white working classes and there's the black and Hispanic working classes, right? And he also has to figure out a way to keep white people happy. Because when white people don't have jobs, right, what you'll have to understand is that they are going to riot and they're going to kill and there's going to be mass hysteria when they don't have jobs. And the government knows that. The government knows the reason why Tulsa, Oklahoma was burned down. It's because as we were striving, poor white people did not have any jobs, any means of income, nor did they have the skill sets, and we were out competing them. And that's why they burnt down Tulsa, Oklahoma. So the government comes in and says, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make you the Irish. We're talking about the Irishman and the Italian man that were gangsters because there was no job. So they turned into a life of gangsters and crime. Now, what do? They said, well, we're going to take these gangsters and we're going to make them police officers. And they can then take their aggression out as police officers and maybe kill one or two black people a year just to satisfy their thirst for blood, right? But let's keep reading. Let's get there real quick. So we're over here now. I'm going to highlight it real quick. We're right here. It says this. Still, the pitting of one group of workers against another and the use of race as a means of doing so remained a feature in American labor relations. During a 1917 strike at the aluminum ore company in St. Louis, the company brought in several hundred African Americans as strike breakers. So now, when there would be a strike at a particular company, let me scroll back here. When there would be a strike at a particular company, we came in as strike breakers. We were the ones to break the strike, and they were hiring us by the hundreds to fill in the missing gaps in the workforce. And so while the white man was outside striking, we were coming in by the boatload as strike breakers to fill in those roles. And so this created a problem, especially for our people, because now Now our oppressor was more angered than ever. Now our oppressor saw a means to incite violence against our people because the fact that we were taking their jobs and we were performing at a higher level made our oppressor extremely angry, right? So they called us strike breakers, and we paid for that. We paid for going into these companies as strike breakers, and we paid dearly for it, right? And a lot of times with our lives, which is why Lincoln was saying early, he said this. He said, the most notable feature of a disturbance in your city last summer was the hanging of some working people by the other working people. So white workers were hanging black workers because of the animosity that they had towards us, that we were coming in, filling up them jobs while they were on strike, right? Because these companies knew that they could pay us at lower wages, right? Than having to pay the white man the regular, higher wages with lower skill sets, right? Let's keep reading. Let me pull this up again. All right. So we're over here right now. Let's read this real quick. It says this. In 2 outbreaks of rioting, white union workers killed black residents and burned hundreds of homes and businesses in East St. Louis, right? So the white man decides, oh, okay, so the company is filling in our roles and hiring black people as strikebreakers. So they decide, so a couple of riots break out, and what do? What they've always done when they don't have jobs. They go and they burn, they kill black residents. And they burned hundreds of homes, right? This is what they do. They go in and they take out their anger on us for what their people are doing to them, right? Because with our oppressor, it's all about the money, right? Right? It's all about the money with him, right? He'll throw his morality and his principles to the side when it comes to money. He'll dismiss his own people when it comes to money. That's how greedy of a beast he is, right? Well, let's keep reading. Incidents on the scale, Salakia. Let me, y'all still following along? Okay, let's keep reading. It says, starting from here. It says, incidents on that scale were rare. However, and black and white labor leaders such as Philip Randolph, who organized the first predominantly African-American union, and Walter Reuther, a president of the United Auto Workers, and one of Martin Luther King Jr.'s closest allies, dedicated themselves to the transracial solidarity. But in the recent years, as wages have stagnated and income inequality has risen dramatically, the tactic of dividing labor against itself has been revived by some Republican leaders and by President Trump, who have fermented anger towards public employees and immigrant workers. Now, the anger that Carrot Top Trump has had towards our Mexican people was displayed by him building walls to keep the Mexicans out, right? Because who else would want those walls to go up? I'm going to let you think about this for a quick second. Who else would want those walls to go up? Who else would support Trump in putting up the walls? I'll give you the answer in a sec. Let me know. Who else you think would want to support? What union? Which kind of union would want to put up walls? Would want Trump to put up the walls to keep the Mexicans out? Let me see if you can get this. All right, let me give it to you. The ones that would want the walls to go up if the Mexicans, to keep the Mexicans out, would be the construction union, like I brought up earlier. The reason why I'm saying that is because the Mexican brothers, you go to Home Depot and grab all the supplies that you need to build a crib and pick up 5 of them ISUPK brothers, the Mexican brothers. Trust and believe they will build that house within a week. Within 2 days, that house will be built from ground up to the T. And now that is a threat to the construction union. When you think about unions, right? Why are we calling out these racist unions? Because they're predominantly hiring white people, right? And understand that when a new job or a new role comes in, the people that work there are calling who? Their family members to go work there. And so the cycle just goes on and on and on. And now you have a huge racial disparity in America in the workers' union, which was designed to keep our oppressor afloat, right? To make sure that he always has a job, considering he doesn't have the skill sets we have, considering he's not as talented in the carpentry industry as we are, considering that everything we touch turns to gold. You gotta understand the world moves. Listen, how we move is how the world is coursed. That's how the world is coursed, is how we move, right? And we haven't realized that yet. We haven't realized the tremendous contribution that we've put in this place, right? The tremendous contribution that we put in this place. We still have not come to terms with that. But let's keep reading, right? Salak, let me put this down real quick. I feel like this is kind of high. Hey, Salakia. We'll put this down real quick. There you go. A little lower. There you go. You can see me better now, right? All right. All right. So let's go back to the article real quick. Now it says this, right? We're over here right now. So we just talked about the riots that these white union workers that killed black residents. We talked about Philip Randolph, who was actually part of the civil rights movement, who has made a big contribution to the civil rights movement. But yeah, we're right over here. So during the 70 years after the Civil War, the labor movement grew steadily and won piecemeal improvements in working conditions and wages. Then in 1935, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed the sweeping National Labor Relations Act, known as the Wagner Act, which guaranteed the right to join a union and to strike. So now, when this act was signed, this act played a pivotal role, because now you could join a company, and while you're in that company, you can join a union, and it gave you the right to join a union. It also gave you a right to strike and not necessarily lose your job when the union went on strike. So this was pivotal benefit. We weren't allowed to be in those unions, nor were we able to strike. We didn't have just the fact that we had a job, that alone would never cause us to strike, right? Successful organizing efforts were set in motion across the country, even at fiercely anti-union companies such as Ford Motor Company, right? Let's read this. In May 1937, Ford's private security officers beat a group of UAW organizers. Understand that these companies, they also had to hire security. They had to hire a sort of a police force because of how often these strikes went on and the violence that was incited and the riots that were incited. So they had to hire some sort of armed forces to protect their investment, so that these rioters would not go and these strikers would not go and burn down their company, right? But even then, the institutionalized racism of the South made organizing there especially difficult. It also made the region a fertile base for a largely successful anti-labor campaign that continues to this day, right? Let's keep reading. We're right over here now. That effort began in the earnest 1940s when Vance Muse, a conservative activist from Texas and a white supremacist, started the so-called right to work movement. Now we're gonna touch up on the so-called right to work movement, right? This movement right here. Let's read. Right to work allows workers in a unionized workplace to opt out of paying union dues, thus eroding the union's financial standing and its bargaining power. Muse feared the power of unions to foster race mixing, and by the end of the 1947, 11 states, let me pull this up for you. 11 states, Salakia, let me find it real quick. 11 states, most of them in the South, had passed right-to-work laws either through their legislators or by amending their constitutions. That year also saw the passage over President Harry S. Truman's veto of the Taft-Hartley Act, which enshrined a state's ability to enact a right-to-work law. Muse's campaign was soon taken over by corporate labor antagonists, including French Koch, the Kansas oil magnate and the father of Charles and David Koch. There are now 27 right-to-work states, right? So that rights-to-work act was key in keeping our people out of the workplace, because what it did was it allowed you to discriminate against who you can hire or who can, you know what I mean? And it tried to delimit the it tried to limit the union from race mixing, right? And that's what they would. That was the whole aim from this devil in the South by the name of Muse, who was an activist in the South. All right, let's talk about good old Wisconsin. Give me 1 second. All right, let's pull this up real quick. 30 years later, Scott Walker, the governor of Wisconsin, signed Act 10, a bill that decimated public employees' collective bargaining rights in the state. At the same time, Walker praised private sector unions, particularly those in the building trades, many of whose members vote Republican, and assured them that he had no interest in the right-to-work bill. In a call election of the following year, Walker won a third of a union household. In 2015, he signed a right-to-work bill that crippled Wisconsin's private sector unions too, right? So now, there was a fight between the public sector and the private sector. And so, as the private sector, these privatized unions were trying to race mix, the right to work was enacted to stop the racial mixing in the unions, right? You gotta understand this everything that all the political events that go on in this place and all the laws that go on in this place, every single one has to do with us, right? It has to involve the slaves, right? Before you make a decision on a particular law, before a law is enacted, right? How do we put out a law to make sure that these slaves don't come up, that they're not able to prosper and financially be made well off? Let's keep reading. Act 10 inspired collective bargaining restrictions in other states and attacks on federal workers. Breitbart News called them a privileged class, and during the 2016 presidential campaign, Trump promised a hiring freeze on almost all federal agencies to reduce the government workforce through attrition. Right-to-work laws and collective bargaining measures like Act 10 have taken their toll. Today, barely 10% of the workforce, public and private sector combined, belongs to the union. Salakia, let me get back over here. You know what I mean? Okay, so let's... let's let's pull up another article real quick. So like I want to pull up another article. Okay, so the other article I want to pull up, 1 second. See what this is real quick. Bear with me, I'm just pulling up another article. Okay. Here's another article. It's called racist-justice.aflcio.org. I want to put this in here real quick. All right? We'll spend the next 15 minutes on this article. But before we do that, I want to pull up a scripture. All right? Let's go to Salakia. Let me pull it up real quick. Okay, so let's go to let me see if I can find it. It says, let's go to Job chapter 8, verse 22. Salaki. Let me see if I can find it. Let's go to Ezekiel let's go to Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 29. Let me write this down. In Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 29, here's what it says. It says this. For thus saith the Lord, behold, I will deliver thee into the hand of them whom thou hatest, into the hand of them whom thy mind is alienated. And this is what happened. we fell into the hands of the people that hate us and that we should hate. But our black leaders has pumped up our minds so that we can love our enemies and love our oppressors and join them while the Most High is about to destroy this kingdom. And our mind is alienated from him, right? The way, like I mentioned in Genesis chapter 25, we are two separate nations. We're two different manners of people. You know what I mean? Our mind is alienated from this society. This society functions well for our oppressor, but it does not function well for us because this society has been pinned against us for the last 400 years. The makeup of this society has everything to do with us, and to keep us and to keep a foot or a knee on our neck, right? But let's keep reading. It says this, verse 29, and it's talking about our oppressors here. Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 29, it says, and they shall deal with thee hatefully, and shall take away all thy labor, and shall leave thee naked and bare. And this is what they did. These racist workers' unions that were formed off the strength that white Americans feared that we were going to take their jobs because of all the knowledge and all the craftsmanship and the carpentry and the skill sets that we got out of slavery. They formed these racist unions. And when they formed these racist unions, it says this, they dealt with us hatefully, which is why when we were strike breakers, they were hanging us. They were killing black residents because of the whole notion and the whole idea that we were taking their jobs. And they left us naked and bare. That's what they did. That's what Labor Day has done. Labor Day and these racist workers' unions have left us naked and bare. Let's keep reading. And the nakedness of thy whoredoms shall be discovered, both thy lewdness and thy whoredoms. Now, let's read verse 30. I will do these things unto thee because thou hast gone a whoring after the heathen. And that's what we do. We've always wanted to be like our oppressors. We've always wanted to chase their God and worship their God. We've always been pumped up in our minds to join our America and to join our oppressor in his heaven. But unfortunately, his heaven only works for him. You know what I mean? It does not work for you. Your mind is alienated from his society and how it functions. It only functions with him being on top, being in rulership, and keeping you subjected as a slave. Let's read this next part real quick. All right? So I'm going to read this article real quick. I like this one right here. It says this, America's Declaration of Independence asserts that all men are created equal and that they're endowed by the Creator with certain alienable rights, right? The people that wrote the American Declaration of Independence understand, they said that all men are created equal. But here's the problem with that, is that those people that said that all men are created equal, that wrote the American Declaration of Independence, were also slave owners, right? So we got to keep that in mind. But let's scroll down real quick. Let me see what we got. Slovakia. All right, so we're gonna start. says both union and civil rights activists understood that the labor rights are human rights and that to constrain a person's liberty to choose one's work, probably want to go a little bit more down. All right, here's what I wanted to get to. All right, let's get to the actual story of race and labor in America. All right, let's get this real quick. It says this: the story of race and labor in American workers in the South. That region's cultural, political, and economic influence on the rest of the country continues to this day. When African Americans moved north in the 20th century over the course of 2 world wars and the Great Depression, they found more personal freedom, but they also found ongoing discrimination and unequal access to economic opportunities. Well, I mean, what would you think, right? You would think it would have been better up north, right? Which is the mentality that most people have. But as they thought they had personal freedom, they realized that there was a Jim Crow of the North as well, right? Where it says they found ongoing discrimination and unequal access to economic opportunities, right? In the decades between the 2 wars, business interests deliberately used race and ethnic differences to undermine labor unity. Some unions responded by embracing integrations. Others resisted. So now there was a divide between all these unions. The ones that embraced integration in the unions were the criminals that wanted to get black people up in these unions so they can make so much money. It's all about money, right? And others wanted to keep it pure and white and make sure that if we keep our white workers happy and we establish a segregated work environment, then we can avoid that. But then other unions were like, we're going to embrace integration because we can make more money off these slaves that are going to come in and can pay them lower wages. Correct? Even after the civil rights legislation finally made racial discrimination illegal in the 1960s, conservative politicians used racial stereotypes and white fear and anxieties to divide working people. And this was the crutch of how they were able to be so successful in the divide in the workforce. It said this, I'm going to read it one more time. Conservative politicians used racial stereotypes, right? And white fear. Remember that. Racial stereotypes and white fear, which is what always motivates the white man to take action. All you have to do is pump the white man's mind up with some sort of racial stereotype. You could say something like, well, if you allow black people to move into your neighborhoods, then they're going to start sleeping with your wives and your daughters, and they're going to rape your wives and your daughters. Now, understand that falls under racial stereotypes and white fear and anxieties, it says. Right? This is how you keep the divide going. And this is how they've always done it. Right? The key word is white fear. You make the white man fear, he's going to take action. He's going to make sure interest. He's been doing it from time to time. They continue to do so today. The labor movement can and must be at the forefront of efforts to push back against the politics of division. We owe it to our members, our children, and our country. All right. Let's go to black workers moving north. All right. Let me get on video real quick. Let me get this real quick. This is the last one I'm going to pull up. In the 1910, 90% of African Americans lived in the South. The vast majority were sharecropping in rural areas, but hostilities in Europe had almost stopped the flow of white workers to northern factories. while increasing the demand for product from munitions and weapons manufacturers. And this is, you got to understand how big the Industrial Revolution was and how things were just moving so fast, right? And how production was on a higher level where they could not meet the demand. And who else were they to hire to meet the demand? The slaves, the so-called black and Hispanic man. This gave, let's keep reading, this gave unions more negotiating power, and wages were inching up. So employers started recruiting black workers from the South as strike breakers and replacement workers. About 500,000 black workers moved to Chicago, Ohio, Philadelphia, and St. Louis between 1910 and 1920. Right? Let's keep reading. The worst recorded incident of labor-related racial violence occurred in St. Louis in 1917, when the aluminum works. So we read that earlier, where they killed 200 black youths. Let's keep. All right. Let me see what I want. Let's keep reading. The worst recorded incident of labor-related racial violence occurred in St. Louis in 1917. This is the part we want. I'm going to highlight it right here. A year later, 4 million soldiers returned from World War I with no plan for absorbing them into the economy. Unemployment rose rapidly. Both white and black veterans felt betrayed. In the Red Summer of 1919, 38 separate race riots occurred. All of them, and I'm going to read again, all of them white mobs attacking blacks. The worst riot occurred in Chicago after a black youth was stoned for swimming into the white part of the lake. Irish and black gangs battled each other for 13 days. When it was over, 23 blacks and 15 whites were dead. 537 were injured, and 1,000 black families were homeless. Across the country, more than 100 people died that summer, while scores of black homes and businesses were destroyed. All right. For sake of time, we are running out of time. To conclude, what we have to understand, like I mentioned earlier, is that the labor unions were started to give white workers jobs. That's why it was started. Now, there was a division between these labor unions because a lot of them wanted to integrate and a lot of them did not want to integrate. Because if you integrate, what will happen is that because our oppressor hates us so much, right? What we have to understand is that it incited a lot of violence in the workplace. And so we really have to understand, we really, like I was mentioning earlier, we really got to ask questions as to why we're pulling out that grill right now, right? People that should be honored on Labor Day are our people, so-called black and Hispanic people, who have went through the worst and the harshest treatments in the work labor, who've worked practically for free, who had to leave their children behind home alone to go out into them fields and work for our oppressor, right? And with that, we're going to end the class. But before we end it, let's go to Job chapter 20, verse 18. It says this: that which he labored for shall he restore, and shall not swallow it down. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. Verse 19. Because he hath oppressed and forsaken the poor. Right? The white man is going to pay for all the sweat the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into this place to build you the most beautiful empire that you've ever seen, right? To create a utopia for our enemy, right? And he's going to pay because he had oppressed and forsaken the poor, because he had violently taken away a house which he builded not, right? And with that, we're going to class. We're going to class right now. We're the Israelite School Universal Practical Knowledge. Started out of 1 West, 125th Street, Harlem, New York. We have class tomorrow, Brotherhood class from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. online. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Twitter. We also have class on Wednesday, the law class. Tune in Wednesday nights, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Also, Commander General Yohana will be hosting the Black Watch. Once again, the Black Watch with Commander General Yohana will be hosted at 8 p.m.